Hey, today we're going to talk about 1.6, Phosphorus Cycle. So take a moment to review the enduring understanding, check out the learning objective, and pause the video, review the essential knowledge, and set up your Cornell notes. So the Phosphorus Cycle is a relatively straightforward and I think very simple cycle to learn about because it's not much to it. Things you got to remember. There is no gaseous component. It's all in the solid form. And pretty much it deals with phosphate, which is PO4, which is a polyatomic ion, and it has incredibly low solubility in water. So because of that, it will be a limiting nutrient because when it is moved around, when it's made available to organisms, they snatch it up because they need it. Why do organisms need it? Because they need to make two very important molecules. Well, more molecules, but they make ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. Look, one phosphate, two phosphates, three phosphates. Adenosine triphosphate is ATP. It is used as an energy source for all of our life functions. You also notice in ATP there's a lot of nitrogen as well. So when we talked about the nitrogen cycle, guess what? That's why it's important. All right, also it is used in DNA. There is a phosphate backbone in the DNA. In fact, if you look at my tattoo, I don't know if you can see, I got phosphates there. I got a big phosphate down here. You can see it in person too. But it is the backbone of the DNA molecule, and it's also the backbone of an RNA molecule, and it provides the genetic material, everything that we need to make all of the proteins in our body. It is a very, very, very slow cycle. So it's pretty much mostly a geologic cycle, but we have weathering that occurs, and weathering is just the breakdown of rocks. So you will have different rocks, little parts being broken off, and then some of that will run off, and some of that is available to plants that can take in these phosphates. It also is available to animals that can absorb this phosphate or consume this phosphate in other organisms. And then once it is running off, you'll also have leaching. And that's where some of the phosphates will go down into the soil, and it will cycle down in the areas of the soil where it is carried off by water. Remember, it is not really soluble in water, but it can flow with the water from point A to point B. Next thing you might have is once it's in the soil, it might be assimilated into plants. When they take up the water in the roots, they will also be absorbing the phosphates. So once it enters a plant, then it can be made into the ATP or into DNA or RNA or any of the other molecules that require phosphate. Once organisms die, it may sediment to the bottom of the ocean. Again, it will be buried. It will form different rocks. It'll be parts of different rocks. Don't ask me what kind of rocks are formed with phosphate. I don't know. I never had to know. You don't have to know. You can look it up though. But the last thing that's going to happen is through geologic uplift. And this is through tectonic activity, through the movement of the Earth's crust. You will have some of the rocks that have been buried over millions of years will lift up again and start the process all over again. That was pretty simple, right? That's basically it. Humans can impact the phosphate cycle by mining for phosphate. Phosphate, along with nitrogen and along with potassium, NPK, are three limiting nutrients. If you look on any sort of Miracle-Gro, any of the plant fertilizers, they all talk about NPK. All three are limiting nutrients. All are needed for plant growth. So phosphate is mined for different fertilizers. And remember, when we add phosphate-based fertilizers, any sort of runoff can lead to eutrophication. Just a reminder, eutrophication is when nutrient-rich waters run off into a body of water and cause this influx of nutrients can cause an algal bloom. And an algal bloom is when there is a huge growth in photosynthetic algae, and what happens is eventually they die. The decomposers break them down, consuming all the oxygen in the water in the process. When this oxygen is consumed, the fish cannot survive because of hypoxia, which means reduced oxygen. that causes a biodiversity loss. So, to practice, I would like you to describe how phosphorus moves between different reservoirs within the phosphorus cycle. Take your moment to answer this question. Remember what is required when you describe something. I hope that this video was informative to you. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will see you soon.